won't bore you with that. I wanted to talk this morning about being under the influence. And I think we all pretty much know what that has meant in our human terminology. It has meant when you talk about somebody being under the influence, you're thinking they're going to get a DUI, right? And I'm certainly not making light of that, please. If I want you to know that this morning, I am not making light of that. We're certainly all familiar with that term, and it's commonplace. We don't even think about where it came from, but I'm going to tell you where it originated. When I started looking at a bit of history, I was a little surprised. I thought that maybe, even when there were horses and carriages, that it may have been an issue. I think it probably was, but the horse probably had enough sense to stop. Don't you think? So it actually originated on September 10th, 1897. A 25-year-old London taxi driver ran into a building. His name was George Smith. He became the first ever person to be arrested for drunk driving. Can you believe it? He later pleaded guilty and was fined 25 shillings. It's a whole lot. And in the U.S., the first laws against operating a motor vehicle while under the influence of alcohol went into effect in New York in 1910. In 1936, a professor of biochemistry and toxicology patented the drunkometer. I think, interesting, huh? The drunkometer, interesting name. It was a balloon-like device that people would breathe into to determine if they were inebriated. And then in 1953, a man that worked with him, Robert Borkenstein, he was a former Indiana State police captain and university professor. He is the one that invented the breathalyzer, and we've had it ever since. It was a lot easier to use than that first thing. But I'm not here to talk about that today, although that was a little bit of trivia, wasn't it? I had a silly guy I worked with when I was in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and I hope he was kidding. It reminded me, when I was thinking about this, it reminded me of him and his days when he was in the service and he was stationed in Germany. And he said that some nights he would drink so much that he was too drunk to walk back to the base, so he had to drive. He had no choice. And I hope he was kidding, but I never was sure from what he said. What I'm here to talk about today is living under the influence of a higher power, God, source, love. That's what I want to be under the influence of, and I want people to be able to see that in me. And I hope you do too. We may not have a breathalyzer for it. We can sure recognize it, can't we? We can feel it when we're in somebody's presence. They don't have to tell you, do they? If they're spiritually evolved, you know pretty quickly. You don't need to know much about them, where they came from. You can feel it. You can see it. You know it pretty soon. We know about people who've developed and strengthened that connection to Source. Their energy feels loving, accepting, and their decisions are made from a much higher level of wisdom and understanding. They don't bow to cultural pressures. They're loving, kind, courteous, and respectful, but they're not afraid of speaking the truth. Their energy actually draws you to them. That must have been the way it was with the masters who've walked this earth, don't you believe? All of them that we've heard so much about. The Buddha, Lao Tse, Francis of Assisi, Jesus, and others. They had an energy and a vibration that was formed in love, the vibration of God. What would it feel like to be under such an influence? This absolute loving river of life. Jealousy, envy, anger, self-righteousness, victimization, haughtiness, these things would disappear. And in their place, as one advances in his or her level of consciousness, noticeable changes take place. Sometimes when a person wakes up, they find themselves not able to tolerate what they did earlier in their lives. They may begin to separate from family and friends, and at first they don't understand. They just know there's a disconnect here that doesn't work for me anymore. It can be extremely uncomfortable. They find they can no longer be in situations where there's darkness that refuses to allow the light to come in. And as this individual sets the intention to bring light to every corner of their lives, their vibration, their countenance, their consciousness changes, and the energy around them changes, and you can feel it. I want you to think about this for a moment, if you would. You know how it feels to be around someone who is needy, needs your attention, talk too much. They can suck the air right out of a room, can't they? You know that. Let's don't pretend there's no one in our lives that's ever met that criteria for us. We know they have. They need to impress others, and that does not come from a healthy place. It's a human characteristic that needs to be identified, and we probably need to steer clear of them. And if you feel that you might have that within yourself, now's a good time you might want to identify that and decide to heal it. If you see yourself at all in that role, you might say, okay, that's me occasionally. I can identify that. I don't want to be that anymore. I set my intention right here, right now, to have enough confidence, enough self-worth, that I need not always fall into an old habit, just because it's an old habit. The need to control. Does anybody know anyone that needs to control all the time? Okay. This person is so obsessed with order in their lives that they feel they need to dictate everything around them, including you. Their energy feels overpowering, and you'll want to flee. Then you'll start thinking about why you really don't want to be around them much, and then you might be able to identify it. And if you're close enough friends, you may be able to have a nice conversation with them. Just depends. May not. Playing the victim. The need for someone else to take care of them. When you're with someone like that, you feel that you must take care of them because they can't take care of themselves. It's quite obvious. This is not a healthy relationship. And you may remain friends, but you you must cut the invisible cord and see this person as capable and whole. Quit being an enabler. The victim needs to work on their own self-worth and ability to make good decisions. And the enabler, the caretaker, you must work on allowing others to make their own choices without your feeling compelled to step in. I have to stop myself on that one, I've got to tell you. It's something I've needed to have a lot of work on over the years, and I still do. Freely admit it. What about complainers and those that refuse to take responsibility for their lives? You know any of those? They may regularly find themselves complaining to others to get them on their side or to get their pity. Complaints may be about our boss, our health, our situations, the economy, lack of money, lack of opportunities. And it's demonstrated by a lack of confidence in every way, disempowering self-talk like, I'm broke because of fill in the blank. Doesn't matter. I can't do this because of fill in the blank. If that person would do fill in the blank, then I would be fine. That person made a mistake, and that's why I can't do fill in the blank. I wish I could do more, but there's always that comes up in my life. If it wasn't for fill in the blank, things would be okay. Excuses, complaints, we see it all the time. When in this stage, we commonly feel unhappy, powerless, separated, drained, alone, unsupported, stuck, and small. And to move from this stage, it's necessary to give up blame, to take responsibility for your life, and to change things. It's up to you, nobody else. It's up to you. On the other hand, we all know how it feels to be with someone who is under the influence of a higher power, the divine, don't we? Doesn't it just feel wonderful? We just love to be with them. This person wants the highest good, hasn't already chosen sides, and you know it, and they're not going to. Isn't angry. This person doesn't have an agenda. This person wants the highest and speaks calmly of a higher truth, letting go of old ideas and practices and accepting new. Sometimes those new thoughts might be viewed as outrageous. Folks will say, we've lived this way forever and it's worked just fine. We don't want change. We don't want anything new. Let's keep it the way it was. The light worker, the faith keeper, the one who wants only the highest and the best will say, release those old ways and follow a higher way of knowing and understanding. They fully understand that Spirit lives on and is eternal, lives on always. Karen Drucker's song, There's Only Love, conveys this deepest meaning that comes from the heart, comes only from the heart. I love that song. If I could sing, I'd sing it for you now, but I'll do you a favor and I won't. This song conveys the deepest spiritual quality that we're searching for. You'll recognize someone of this higher consciousness by their higher love. They're unwilling to allow human emotions and traits to bring them down. They refuse to be drugged down to a lower level of consciousness. It's difficult at times. We all have a lot of triggers, don't we? If I were to think of a time in recent history that would be full of triggers, I don't know if there would be one that could even equal what we have right now. Excuse me a second. Excuse me. The pandemic. My goodness. We don't even have words to describe that, do we? There is no way prior to January 2020 we would ever have been able to predict that. We knew that a lot of people that had said that there was change coming, world change, and we didn't know how that was going to take place. Well, all of a sudden, everything just stopped, didn't it? It gave us an opportunity to look at ourselves, how we spend our time. We had those years that were a gift, if we looked at it that way. Truly a gift. And then the economic scene, the political scene, so many things all around the world, not just here in the United States. Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas. Oh my goodness. It goes on and on and on and on. And so many times these things are done in the name of God and religion. Oh my. They obviously have a different understanding of God than I do, than we do. So we've certainly been given some triggers, haven't we? We've certainly been given some things to look at, to think about, to observe from a higher perspective, to see with the eyes of God. And it was hard not to be triggered when some of your best friends died from COVID. So when one of your best friends from the loneliness killed herself. Just unimaginable pain that we've experienced. We need to give ourselves a bit of grace. We've lived through a lot. We've learned a lot. And hopefully we're still learning. I know I'm open. But getting back to the people dragging you down with their complaining and their misery. I'm thinking of how I'm going to say this without coming up with something that's going to offend somebody. My husband used to have a saying, and that was that you can't argue with stupidity or whatever, fill in the blank, okay, if that offends you. You can't win an argument because they'll bring you down to their level and then they'll beat you with experience. That's kind of what that reminded me of when I was talking about the people that will drag you down. And they will, if you'll let them, they will. So whatever it is, you just keep your consciousness high and concentrate on it. And we're not all perfect, but we're trying. It's why we're here. It's one of the reasons we're here. It's because we're a spiritual community and we want to hone our skills so we can be more joyful. We can bring all sorts of abundance and joy and health and wholeness into our lives. And have terrific experiences with our loved ones. So if I concentrate on my spiritual awareness rather than my human awareness, that's what we're talking about this morning. I'll set aside more of those human triggers that we were talking about. I'll recognize that it's spirit, after all, that lives on and cannot be destroyed. And I have the sweetest little story to tell you about that. What about grief, you might ask? Surely there's no explanation of how this can enlighten us. Grief and loss bring us to a higher awareness. Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. He continued, this procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not very popular. We don't want to do the hard things, do we? We want it to be easy, just as easy as it can be. There used to be that commercial with an easy button. Does anybody remember that? Yeah. There's a story of Miriam Greenspan. She's a psychotherapist. Why the negative emotions of grief, fear, and despair are essential, she says, to achieving a positive state of mind. She says, my first child, Aaron, was born unable to suck or swallow. She says he died in my arms 66 days later, never having left the hospital. She says nobody, least of all the doctors, understood why. She said I'd had a healthy baby, healthy, happy pregnancy. Somehow Aaron had suffered oxygen deprivation in the womb before birth. Excuse me. And they didn't know. She said, I anticipated arriving in the serene meadow of new motherhood. But the road took an unexpected turn, and I found myself in grief's deep abyss, not knowing how to get out. She said, each day Aaron was alive, I knew it might be my last day with him. Gradually, I began to understand that I had only this present moment in which to be his mother and to love him. This moment, right now, because he might be gone the next. She says, my sorrow and my joy in his presence were joined and inescapable. So to be with him, I had to embrace both. In this way, she said, he became my Zen master, teaching me to be mindful in the midst of radical vulnerability. She says at that time she wasn't a spiritual seeker. She was an agnostic and a social activist. So what happened on the day of Aaron's funeral couldn't have been more unexpected for her. She said, throwing handfuls of earth on his small casket just after it was lowered into the ground, she heard a voice say, you're looking in the wrong place. She looked up and she saw Aaron's spirit, magnified, an even more radiant version of the light she'd seen in his eyes, telling her it would be okay. And this landscape of grief opened up and into an expansive vista of limitless blue sky. She said Aaron taught her all kinds of things. She wouldn't have been open to learning before. She never would have been open to those. Her whole life she knew that because her mind was closed on it. She looked for scientific facts, things that she felt were real. And then she found a true reality, and it shocked her. She would never have learned those things had it not been for what she went through with the loss of that baby. She never would have found her purpose. Most times our spiritual growth comes from the times we've spent in the darkness, stayed with it until we have found the gift and the light. We then become a beacon of strength, of hope, a light bearer to continue on our own walk and our own work, whatever it is. From a higher perspective, with a profound and a deeper love in our hearts. We can then say that we're living under the influence of light and love and God. I encourage each of you today to be willing to identify the places you're still in the darkness and ask to see the light. Be willing. And I'd like to say to you today, from my heart, the light of God in me recognizes and bows to the light of God in you. Amen. Thank you for your time.